I travel a lot, and the last few years has been a lot of focus on the Arabic Spring, and also, of course, in connection with me working for this paper, Dagens Nyheter, I did a lot of assignments on the West Bank and Palestine and Israel because it was very much intertwined with the Second Intifada, where I started for this paper. But 80% of what I do, or even more, is just small stories that I find in my daily work as a newspaper photographer. I do assignments every day, like any other photographer in my paper. Assignments that sometimes can look very boring on the surface, but can have a lot of content underneath. We just did a story a few weeks ago of a mother who has a 4-year-old daughter, and she's blind. The mother is blind, and to give her daughter good childcare, a good school for her to go, she changed municipality within Stockholm. And by doing that, doing the best for her kid, she lost a lot of her help. Authorities told her she can only have 13 hours per month of help going outside the house. And that includes picking up at the daycare center and so on, which means she's more or less confined to her house. And the old place she used to live, she had 60 hours. And it's really not fair. Just because you move a couple of kilometers, the rules shouldn't change like that. So we did a news story about that. And then I asked her if I could continue to follow up and do a longer, more visual story about her everyday life. And I started doing that. And I've been with them now 3 or 4 times, and it's really interesting to see. And I can't imagine what it's like to have a 4-year-old jumping around in your house or outside if you're blind. It's a really nice, very nice story to do in one way, and it's sort of heartbreaking in another because they rarely go out. So that's one of the stories I started to develop. It's like an embryo of a story. I don't know where it's going to take me. It could be a story that I do for a year or maybe 2 or 6 months. Another story I just started. I do a lot of stories simultaneously. I had a lecture at work for some of the journalists at work, working for a special section. And I showed them a little bit of how I do and what I do. And one of these people, the journalist, came up to me and she said, one of my friends is a hospital clown. And she works now with old people that has Alzheimer's and so forth. They used to work with children in hospitals, but now they changed their concept. That sounds like a really interesting story. So I'm starting to do that as well. So I went to 4 different homes with the clowns. It's quite sensitive. So some of them are all alone, and some of them have relatives. And since they have dementia or Alzheimer's, they cannot make the decisions themselves. So it's a lot of negotiations and talk before I can come in. But it's been working very good, especially a few places has really given me a lot of access. So I started to do that story, and that I'm going to keep on doing for a long time, I think, because that has a lot of potential to be a really heartwarming story. Just to see these uncommunicative, sick old people shine up, not only with the touch or the movement or the music, because there's a lot of communication that they kind of get back to again. They can sit and be quiet for days, and then these actors come in and they really shine up. It's really good meetings between these people. I really like it. Another story I did is a series of portraits of people living in Stockholm. And I stole that idea, or got the inspiration from Todd Heisler. He's a photographer in New York Times, and I met him last week. So I told him that, and it was okay. He did a story, a portrait of people in New York called 1 in 8 million, which is really fantastic. And he did it in his way. He did, I think, 1 day per person, and they did 52 people. They actually did 54. I'm doing much longer, and I'm doing more a theme in Stockholm. I call it 1 in 1 million. Josefin Iverstam, I met her during a daily assignment. For my paper, she was a young woman writing poems in a writing class. And she was really intelligent, really nice person. So I asked her if she could be a part of this series of portraits that I do of people in Stockholm. And she was happy to be that. So I started following her, like, what are you doing tomorrow? And, well, I'm emptying my father's apartment. And I said, oh, why? Because he just died. So the story about her is about her coping with the loss of her father. And that's the main issue of her story, the portrait of her in Stockholm. So that's mainly what I do. I find these small nuggets of seeds, these small seeds I can plant somewhere. And it could be for 6 months, it could be for 1 week, it could be for the longest I've did it, I think 3.5 years. And I'm actually still doing it. So it's a very long process as I start, when I try to not work as I do normally at the paper. You meet somebody, it's a very static meeting, you take a portrait, usually. If it's not sports or a concert or press conferences. It's very much static meetings. And in these instances, instead of doing that, I do the total difference. I just go, spend a lot of time with the people and just work in present tense. The pictures come and go as they like. You just have to be, there's some mix between like being half asleep for a while and then waking up when the picture comes. So it's really a totally different way of working. As an example, one story I did that I finally did in many different ways, but it was the same philosophy behind it. I started to follow two brothers who had a really hard background. They were handicapped, mentally a little handicapped, but they always had each other. They're twins, and they had a sister as well. But these brothers always lived together in orphanages. They were treated very badly when they grew up, but they always had their strength, and they always lived together. But the family per se was the sports club in Stockholm called AIK. And the sports club have many different sports, but when I started to follow them, it was about football. They had 4 or 5 big games ahead of them, this sports club, and if they would have won the coming 3 fights or games, they would reach the finals, which is very rare for this club. So it was a really big story, so I started to follow them. And then it turned out one of the brothers was also sick. The twin brothers were sick in cancer. So it turned out to be a story that evolved more or less from their house to the hospital, to being checked up and finally getting admitted to the cancer ward. And then the house and the games and the hospital and the house. So it went to be like a triangle. So the story went positive in one direction. The team won their final games and came to one last game, the big gold final. At the same time, Lennart, the older brother, was, 4 minutes older brother. He was determined that he had cancer, he was going to die. So it turned out to be a 2-pronged story three-pronged story that we first published in the Sunday paper, but I continued shooting in the same way I described before. And then when the story was published in the Sunday paper, the board of this sports club, AIK, they called up and said that the brothers were going to be invited to the final game if the game team made it then. And they made it, so they flew down to Gothenburg with the brothers, which sounds like a small deal for us, young people that travel a lot, but for them, they had never been in an airplane, so it was a really big deal for them. And going in the same plane as the board of directors, it was a major thing. And I didn't realize then, but the doctors, having determined that his cancer was lethal, stopped his treatment. And they gave him extra blood and extra nourishment for him to be able to perhaps go to this game. So they kind of doped him a little bit, you could say. So he went, the sick brother. He was really, really sick, really bad during the game. He threw up several times during the game. He had to go out. He was really sick. But he was there when they scored the final goal, and they won. It was like a Hollywood script come true. And they were elated with happiness. And then they came back to Stockholm, and they went to the big party in central Stockholm. The whole central Stockholm was closed. It was a big deal. And it was a really big day for them. And then a week, I think, a little more than a week later, he got really sick, and he died. So I went to the funeral and covered that. It was really... I can't say a nice event, but it was really the church was like a 16th century church, packed with people. It was really nice. And then the first hockey game, I continued shooting. At the first hockey game, after that, the board of directors took out the surviving brother out on the red carpet, on the ice, and they had a moment of silence for his brother. And then they said that they were not going to sell his chair that season or the next season. So the chair was almost going to be empty with a flag over it. The rest of this is. We're still friends, me and Eric. He comes to the paper. Once, twice a month, and because he used to work at the paper. His brothers, well, they didn't work at the paper. They worked at the canteen next to the paper, the lunch restaurant. Took out the dishes. That's how I knew them from the beginning. So he comes. We just 2 weeks ago we had coffee. He's a really nice guy. I mean, that photography is, for me, you can't be friends with all the people you shoot, of course, but when I do in-depth stories like that, you always have to connect with the person you shoot, which is a no-brainer, of course, but it's really nice. For me, a camera or the visual type of storytelling is a way to see people. I'm sitting here with you. I would never have met you if I didn't take up photography when I was 10 or 11. I mean, it's great. You get to see the world, and you get to talk to very interesting people. So I'm very, very privileged that way.